Hi everyone, hope you're all well. So it's been a little while since I made a video. I don't usually have a hiatus as long as this. I think it's been about a week now. But to be honest, maybe I spend too much time online generally on social media on this channel. It's a channel that I care about and I care about my subscribers insofar as I don't want to take you guys and girls for granted. But um the truth is, I have been distracted. I've been busy, so yeah, that's the situation. I may try and do a live stream soon, but I can't promise that. If I do, I'll put a heads up for it. I'll put a little notification. So I might make a video about the Glasgow climate summit. There was some big conclusions hammered out the last minute yesterday. I'm sure there's a lot to say about that. But I want to think of an angle to take with it because there's so much to say on that issue. So I don't want to necessarily just talk generically, but I'll have a think about that one if I do indeed make that video. What this is about is the issue of MPs having a second job. Now, this has kind of come up in recent days in light of the Owen Patterson scandal. That's not directly related to that, but it's getting into the issue of political corruption, morality in public office, this sort of thing. Now, let's just be clear having a second job is not against the rules. So, if an MP has a second job, they're not committing any criminal offence, they're not breaking any rules, they're not breaking any parliamentary procedures. There is obviously question marks around it, though. Let me just say from the outset, I'm not entirely against the idea. I think this is a little bit like the issue of MPs' salaries. There's a little bit of hyperbole around it, and there's a little bit of populist outrage on this issue, which I don't think is entirely warranted. And I'm going to try and explain why. Now, on the issue of MP salaries, it's pretty good. It's £81,000 a year, and that's not including expenses. But it's also, a lot less than a lot of media executives, certainly less than sports people, and a lot of people in other sectors. For example, in education, there are university vice chancellors that are getting up to three times as much as the prime minister. So I think the issue of MP salaries is again, there's a bit of hyperbole around that. Being an MP isn't easy work. You have to deal with 100 different issues. Um, in order to be re-elected, you need to do enough to, have your constituents on side. So people might say, "Oh, my MP is terrible; they ignore me." And some MPs maybe are a bit sloppy, but the point is they can be voted out. And MPs know this. They know that their jobs are on the line. This is why they are different, I would argue, than, for example, judges who don't have to face that sort of public scrutiny. MPs do. Every 4 or 5 years, their jobs are on the line. So people forget this fact. But on the issue of second jobs, a lot of people have this knee jerk response. Well, serving thousands of people should be an absolute priority. My response to that is I agree it should be, but I don't agree with the conclusion that they therefore cannot commit to anything else at all. Some people have a tenacity to balance out more than one important thing. And I would point to the fact that a government cabinet, not just this government, any government, the cabinet by definition all have second jobs. Why? Because alongside their job of being prime minister or foreign secretary or health secretary or one of those cabinet positions, they're also a constituency MP. So technically, Boris Johnson's first job is to the people of Uxbridge, right? That's his seat. I think it's just Uxbridge. I don't think there's another. Some seats are combined, like Uxbridge or I think it's just Uxbridge. But anyway, um, yeah, that's actually his first job. So if someone in Uxbridge is unhappy with street lighting in Uxbridge, they contact Boris Johnson. If they are unhappy with some jobs, vandalizing a phone box outside their estate in Uxbridge. Boris Johnson is the man to speak to. So this is a curious thing about our system. In most other systems around the world, or a lot of other systems at least, I mean, Emmanuel Macron, for example, doesn't have a single constituency. His constituency is France. Joe Biden's constituency is the United States of America. He might hail from Delaware, but he is now the president of the United States. And there's other examples. But in our system, every elected politician is a constituency MP as well. Every single one of them, regardless of whether they're an obscure backbencher or the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Is that a good system? I'm not sure. I think there's certainly merit in it. I think it's very democratic in the sense that they can all have their job on the line. Even a prime minister can be voted out of office in a general election, not from the trend of the country, but from whether or not their own constituents reject them or not. Now, most prime ministers tend to have pretty sizable majorities. Tony Blair did, Boris Johnson does, Theresa May did. It just tends to be the way, and I think it's partly because they're actually good constituency MPs. That's one thing, because they've got to the top of politics. They must have something. That's one thing, but the other thing is, I think people actually have a little bit of pride that one of their own is the leader of the country. Um, you know, I think there's at least a little bit of that there. I'm not saying it's like an overwhelming sensation, but I think there's a little bit of that sense there, especially if they're from a rural area, like a small town, as Theresa May was. I know her seat was Maidenhead, but I believe she grew up in rural West Sussex, unless I'm mistaken. But anyway, the issue of second jobs, there's factors such as, I would say, time management is the number one thing. Money, certainly, income. I would say there are moral questions. If an MP who's getting 81,000 a year is in a second job where they're getting 500,000, I would say there's serious moral questions there. Definitely there is conflict of interest. That has to be scrutinised. And I think there is an argument that MPs should be more closely scrutinised to avoid corruption. If you have, for example, an MP who's employed by some multinational company and they're using that second job position, to influence the first, there's an obvious conflict of interest there. And it's worse than that, it's downright corruption, that you would expect in a failed state. So things like that should be scrutinised. But let's say, for example, an MP has a part-time job as a teacher now, or a healthcare worker, not full time, obviously, but if they were part time, even a volunteer. Now, would that not be beneficial? Because then they have a better insight into the world of education, into the world of healthcare. Maybe they could be a PCSO, so they might have an extra insight into antisocial behavior and things like that. They might, not have significant power in that job, but it can get them to see the frustrations firsthand of the public, of the police, and so on. So I am not totally against the idea, and I would simply ask people who are having that knee jerk reaction, it should be a full time job. I would simply say some people can balance it. They can serve their constituents and do another job, and I would argue cabinet members do because they get re elected. So obviously their constituents are happy enough with them because they wouldn't be re elected if they weren't. And I think this is one of those things that people don't entirely consider. Um, but I think if you have an MP who is not a great MP to begin with, like they don't reply to constituents' concerns, and they're not a great MP, and then they have a second job, understandably, the public's going to be angry about that. But there's another point. In most jobs, there is no prohibition on having a second job. Police officers technically can have a second job. I think it varies from force to force on the exact circumstances and red lines of that. Police officers are, I mean, as far as I know, they can't be active members of a political party because there would be obvious biases there. They certainly can't be members of band organisations, etc. Um, Teachers, as far as I know, nurses, doctors, most probably don't because simply the hours are too, it would be impossible to do that. But the point is, most jobs It's not actually prohibited. So why should MPs be prohibited? I mean, why should they be denied opportunities that others have? If it means they're utilizing their full skills in another area, or I'll rephrase that, if they're utilizing skills in another area, not full skills. I mean, I understand on surface level, people would say, well, they got elected to serve the people. That should be the full time dedication. All I'm saying is, I don't agree with the conclusion that because they have another job, they're therefore not committed to being an MP. You know, they might well still see their MP role, and they should see it as their primary job, as their main focus. But if they are doing something, you know, on the side, so to speak, if that's beneficial, maybe to their parliamentary work without conflict of interest, I'm not talking about, financially beneficial. I'm talking about, for example, if it gives them an insight into a particular area, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. And, in the end of the day, why should they be restricted? If there's no laws against it and they're still, putting their constituents first, why should they be prevented from other opportunities? I think that's a bit draconian. Um, I think what should happen is there should be scrutiny of what second jobs are. I think that's the issue. See if there's a conflict of interest. See, I think there should be limits, perhaps, on how much they can earn in a second job. I think some MPs are earning far too much in second jobs, so perhaps there should be a limit in that area. Um, and I think that should be the focus, rather than just say no, they can't have it. I think that's a little bit draconian and unnecessary. But I think the focus should be on what is the second job, how much are they earning, is it interfering with the job as an MP? The job as an MP should come first, absolutely. But I just don't agree with this idea that they cannot be a good MP if they have a second job. That just isn't true because there are, like I say, cabinet ministers who get re-elected. So obviously their constituents think they're good enough. Something to think about.